Hey guys, fantastic. I'm so glad you guys are here with us today. This would not be the same without you. Okay, so just know that. Louisiana in the house. Woo woo. Loving it. All right, fantastic. Next slide, Lori, please. We are live on YouTube. As you guys know, we have ways that we like to engage here on our webinar. So when you're ready to speak, just raise your hand and we'll be able to unmute you and you can ask your questions. If you use the chat, make sure this is going to everyone and not just to panelists and speaker. Otherwise, we won't see you, okay? Or everybody else won't see it. It'll just come to us. And then please be patient with us because we're going to have some really great conversations. We're expecting 81 people here today. It may get a little, robust. So then just be patient with us, okay? We're moving as fast as we can. Next slide, please. If you are new here, we have agreements. Some of you guys are like regulars. I'm so glad you guys are still rolling with us. We have these agreements, and this is how we create a safe space and encourage people to be brave in this space. We have agreements. And they are to speak from your own experience, use I statements, which means as you share, right? Talk about your own experience because your experience has value. You don't really need to talk about other people's experiences. Talk about your own because some amazing stuff happens that way. Follow the golden rule. This really ties up all of our cafe agreements in a nice gift wrap package because we're asking you during this time to not give advice to people. Don't judge people, any of that stuff. But just, treat other people the way you want to be treated. And then full presence, please no multitasking. We know this is our lunchtime, so it's okay to eat. But all the other stuff that you guys do, like checking your emails and candy crushing stuff, don't do that. You're going to miss some good stuff, okay? And if you need a minute, take a minute. Do me a favor and drop that you agree in the chat so that we feel safe enough to take this conversation forward. Okay, I agree. Fantastic. Is it looking good, Lori? All right, so let's get this party started because we've got a lot of information to cover today. Next slide. Today, it is my pleasure to share with you Dr. Cirecie West-Olatunji, and she's going to be talking with us today about can racism be considered an adverse childhood experience? So excited to talk about it, but let me tell you a little bit about her first. She is the founder and CEO of CRESTSprogram, LLC. She has 20 plus years of clinical experience as a private practitioner and community counseling center developer. Her research focuses on the effects of systemic oppression on culturally marginalized individuals, families, and communities. Dr. West-Olatunji's publications include 3 books, over 20 book chapters, and more than 100 articles. Guys, we are so honored and so privileged to have her with us today. For those of you guys who've been with us a long time, Dr. West-Olatunji, we connected last year, and she did a webinar for us that was wonderful. And it blew up and people really enjoyed their time with her. So we invited her to join us this time. And this particular webinar is being done as a promotion to an upcoming institute in-person workshop that is a part of the Bishon Families Institute, where you can hear and learn more about this topic with Dr. West-Olatunji in person in Louisiana. And so write down all your notes. She wants you to feel comfortable to throw your questions in the chat as we're going through today's presentation, because we are going to have a dedicated time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. So as things come up for you, please feel free to put them in the chat, and then we're going to answer them, okay? It's important that she hears from you today. And then with that said, I'm going to turn it over to the expert in the room. Welcome. You're muted. Uh-oh, wait, you're muted.
Yes, I was I always like to mute when you're introducing because I'm laughing and I'm enjoying it and I'm present and I didn't want to distract. But thank you so much for inviting me back. This is a wonderful community of people to be with. I had such a good time last time when you asked me to come back. I said, yes, 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 absolutely. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. And she's going to start sharing, and then I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. West-Olatunji, and you can do your thing.
Thank you. Yes, so
Welcome.
let's get started. So here we are.
We can still see your everything. There you go. You got it. All right.
All right. So today, yes, we're going to talk about adverse childhood experiences and the idea of racism, of systemic structural racism, of the way things are structured and the impact that they have on our children. So I have 3 learning objectives for you. You've probably seen these already, and that's probably why you're here. The first is I'm hoping that as a result of your participation today, that you'll increase your knowledge about race-based adverse childhood experiences, and that you will also augment your own self-awareness about privileged experiences and oppression. And then also, I'm hoping that you'll acquire an understanding of how you can combat race-based stress among young children in particular. So, what am I going to talk about? These 4 topics: institutional racism, continuous traumatic stress, which is different from other forms of trauma and stress that you've probably heard about. I'll also just briefly give an overview of adverse childhood experiences. For some of you, it might be a review. For others, it might provide you with foundational information. And then, of course, the most important thing to talk about is what can families do about adverse childhood experiences that are race-based. So let's start with this topic of institutional racism. So what is it, right? So when we think about it, we're thinking about systems. So we're not necessarily talking about what one person might do or another person might do, how they might treat you, or things like that. It's really about how maybe the deck is stacked against some people versus other people given a little lift off to help them through. It's not that everybody, all human beings face adversity. All human beings have experienced difficulty and distress and trauma. But we also know that in any society, there's sort of the people who are central and core, that everything is really designed around their values and their experiences. And oftentimes, policies and procedures have not been altered or modified to include people who come into that society later or in different kinds of ways. When we think about the US society, for example, we can think about people of African descent. We can think about Latino communities, definitely thinking about Indigenous people, Native American, Indian, and also thinking about people of Asian descent. So there are a lot of different points in history that we can point to where people have systematically experienced marginalization, where they've been left out or they've been locked out of opportunities. So it really is about this systematic or institutionalized practices and procedures that limit people's economic possibilities, their political possibilities, their educational attainment, and also just ways in which they move about in society. So what are the limits that are placed on their ability? And Here, I speak about that group as the non-dominant group because who's dominant and who's non-dominant often changes within various societies. Here in the US, we're a race-based society. And so the dominant group typically is white people, and people of color tend to be non-dominant within our society. And so we are still having, for instance, the first female to do this or the first person of color to do that, and so on. And the reason why we have these firsts is because of this issue of being locked out because of policies and procedures. So I want to give you an example from one of my clinical cases. I remember getting a call from someone who wasn't even in the state of Louisiana, was living actually in the heartland somewhere, I won't say where. And the family had a daughter who was about 10 years old and was going to school in a predominantly white suburban area. And this little girl was the only girl of color, any ethnic group, in the 5th grade in that school. So it's a medium-sized school. They had, I believe, 4 5th grade classrooms. So in the entire 5th grade, she was the only non-white student, male, female, African-American, Latino, whatever. She was it. So that's a pretty white experience culturally for a little girl. And even the neighborhood was predominantly white and so on. So thinking about who are the little kids she plays with, even when she's not in school and so on. Because there weren't a lot of children of color at the school, the children had stereotyped attitudes about what children of color are. And a lot of those stereotyped attitudes were negative. And they used to say things, they would call her names, they would bully her, and so on. And the teacher never said anything, didn't stop the kids from doing that. It was only after the little girl started reacting to the name calling and the bullying, like shouting back at them or, maybe getting into fights with them. She also started showing signs of trauma, and she started drawing pictures. And she also made statements that she wanted to die. And so that's when the school really started responding to her. But what they did is they looked at her as an individual case and said there was something wrong with her. And so she was sent for counseling to get fixed. And as her experiences got worse, they then referred her out to see a psychiatrist. And eventually, the reason why they contacted me multiple states away is when the mother finally started thinking, something's wrong here. I don't agree with what's happening, but it took her a long time to get there. She had a lot of faith and trust in the school system, in the mental health system. So it took her a while to realize her daughter wasn't benefiting and that perhaps the whole system was structured to support prevailing attitudes about what little girls of color should act like or how they should perform. When she started complaining, they then referred her for psychiatry, and that is when she'd had enough. So she started asking around about who she could reach out to help her daughter to change these circumstances and also to advocate for her and her daughter in that system. So that is an extreme case where the whole system starts coming down on a 10-year-old and her family. But yeah, a lot of kids are experiencing that and don't know that there are people who can advocate for them, but also help them to restore themselves to happy, which is what I used to do. So what are some of these outcomes? Why did this little girl have such a hard time, right? Well, we know from the research around race-based stress that it can cause problems in terms of our physical health. And so, if you take a look, if you are a member of a marginalized community, you can just think anecdotally, you can just think about people you know in your family, in your community system, that we often have a disproportionate number of people who experience physical health problems, issues like diabetes, right? People having cardiovascular disease and so on. Also, we disproportionately experience problems with our psychological health. Issues like depression, anxiety is another big one that we see in communities, suicidal ideation, also substance abuse, and so on, that people are struggling with in order to try to address a lot of the psychological harm that is caused as a result of systemic oppression. Third area is in educational achievement, but I could go on and talk about issues in terms of employment, in terms of housing, and so on. We still have studies being done where people are not allowed to purchase houses in certain areas, the redlining that goes on. Also in terms of how houses are appraised, there are studies that have been done where it shows that people of color, their houses are appraised at a much lower amount than they are for others, for dominant group members. When we think about education specifically, we have disproportionality in behavior referrals, in special education categories. We are underrepresented in the gifted classes and so on. So there's a lot of research that's come out to take a look at some of the outcomes. When we think about, issues of stress, right, of, like what we know from neuroscience, and thinking about when we have these encounters, when people are treating us differentially, when we're having difficulty, when we're being locked out, right? We know that people experience increased levels of adrenaline. So you've probably heard about adrenaline, like when people talk about heroic acts, like if something happens and there's an accident, like a tree limb falls on some people, and you find that, there's an average person who doesn't have superhuman strength or anything, but they say their adrenaline gets running and they're able to do these superhuman things like, get this branch off of a person that's really heavy and so on. So what happens is that when we experience stress, whether it's positive or negative stress, our adrenaline kicks in. And from a neuroscience perspective, it activates the sympathetic nervous system. And that's not so much of a bad thing, because our increased adrenaline levels can give us courage to do some things that we normally wouldn't be able to do. Unfortunately, when we experience stress over a long period of time, like a lifetime of racism, our adrenaline doesn't stop. It keeps going. Now, that's a problem. When we experience long-term stress, we don't have, the waxing and waning of the adrenaline, that it spikes up for a certain situation, then it's supposed to go back down, right? And it's a problem when we have these prolonged time periods with the adrenaline running. We also have decreased levels of cortisol and serotonin. And so what happens is we have difficulty moderating our emotions. So we have a difficult time. And so you've heard a lot about emotional regulation, right? This idea that when we have folks who perhaps are angry a lot, that we want to make sure that they can control their anger, right? And go into anger management classes and things like that. Well, when we're experiencing trauma or stress over long periods of time, it's difficult for us to manage our emotions and be able to control that. And so that is one of the issues that we need to think of specifically for children. I know it's difficult for us as adults, but for children, we really need to work with them to show them what are some of the things that we can do to manage our emotions. And then there's also increased levels of endogenous opioids. And so what that is that it's so painful to experience racism, dealing with being locked out or marginalized. And then on an interpersonal level, the bullying, right? And so on that goes on. What happens is that as individuals, we decide we're going to work with it. The brain is so amazing that what will happen is if we experience something that's very painful, a lot of times we'll just forget it. And so we get this memory impairment. Now, we can think of when that works for us. I birthed 2 children many decades ago. My children are now full adults. But we think about childbirth, for example, that can be very painful. One of the things that happens is magically, after we birth our children, we often completely forget how painful it has been. That's how we have multiple children. Exactly. So that's great that that works out that way. We also do it for other kinds of situations. And it can be difficult and it can be problematic even. So if we have children, like children growing up in children of color growing up in predominantly white suburban environments, and they're experiencing this idea of being locked out, often enough, they will start having cognition problems, memory problems, right? Because they're not able to control what they remember and what they forget. So it begins to interfere with their ability to, be at the top of their game in school, for example. And we just think children are just being forgetful. But we don't stop and think, is this related to something else more serious that we need to pay attention to? We also get the emotional blunting, which is basically no affect at all. And this is very concerning. Certainly, if you see that in children, you would want to seek professional help for them. But the idea is that individuals are trying to address the problem. They're trying to deal with it either consciously or unconsciously. Children are trying to deal with this problem. So, we want to look out for these things when we think about what's going on for children in terms of institutional racism in particular. Now let's go on to the second topic of traumatic stress. And I'm going to emphasize continuous traumatic stress because, again, it's this idea that when we're dealing with systemic oppression, when it's socialized, when it's in the systems that we deal with are being locked out all of the time, it's continuous. And so, and I've tried to explain this in different settings. And so I created a little video to try to explain, what do I mean when I'm talking about continuous traumatic stress? So I'm going to share this video with you. And the video is called The Slow Drip of Oppression. So hopefully this is going to work. So let's see. Traumatic stress. Often when I introduce the concept of traumatic stress, clinicians want to better understand how this differs from conventional concepts that we typically use when we're working with our clients. And I often say to them that traumatic stress is persistent, it's chronic, but it's like the slow drip of oppression. So think about it. For lots of culturally and socially marginalized clients, the issues that they deal with are on a daily basis. They experience microaggressions at school, at work, on their way to work, shopping, in their human interactions. So this issue of being socially positioned on the outside is something that's always there. It's something that is below your conscious thoughts. So a lot of times the sound of that drip is just in the background. And after a while, people don't often think about it. So if you were to ask a client about traumatic stress, they might not really have it in their conscious mind to talk about. It just might be something that's in the back of their mind. This constant drip of oppression causes irritability and cognitive distraction. So it becomes very difficult to focus on one's tasks when there are these other things that are going on that impact us and our clients. So we know that it has both cognitive and affective outcomes. It's also a pre-existing condition to clients presenting problems, and it creates this additive effect. So when we think about here in the US, for example, many people of color, whether they are indigenous people from Native American nations or Asian Americans who've been experiencing astronomical rates of racism and racist attacks, physical attacks in the public, or we're talking about people of African descent in the US, or we're talking about people with Latino background, heritage. We know that they experienced a lot of reactions to the police brutality that was very evident and noticeable in the US in the summer of 2020. It's the demarcation of the assassination of George Floyd is something that people have a hard time forgetting. And of course, people from all over the world who have similar kinds of issues of oppression and allies were greatly impacted by that very momentous summer.
Oh no, did we lose? We lost our presenter. Oh no. Let's see if let's give her a minute, guys, and see if she's able to pop back on. I'm like, I thought it was a pause. So I'm like waiting. I'm like, she's gone. Okay. I love the video too. Did anybody else lean forward? Like, what is that noise? I'm like, what is that? There's something like in the background. I think it was meant to catch our attention. Did anybody else hear that? The dripping sound? Yes, Nancy. Exactly. I'm like, oh, it's intentional. Yes. Yes. Are they pausing? Are they disconnected? So let's give her a few minutes and see if she's able to get back on. This is horrible. I hate when Zoom doesn't feel like Zooming or just decides it's going to stop Zooming, because I was all entranced in the conversation, like, oh my gosh, this is so deep. And the connection to the dripping and the trauma was deep. We lost you. I'm texting her right now. Oh my gosh, that part, Jamila. That part. Okay, I'm sending her a message. Wow. Wow. That was deep, because it does become annoying that I don't know how many of you guys feel like that when you hear something constantly dripping and dripping. Yeah, that is irritating. It's irritating and it's annoying. And that connection being made, like Regina said, with the ongoing constant, yes, this is good. The dripping is a great metaphor for slowly losing your energy. Yes. Yeah, like a hole in a bucket, definitely. Ooh, this is good. Y'all teaching. I'm reading the comments and getting chills. Can tolerate single, but when it's bad. Hey, Lucretia, I was looking at like this, Lucretia. Hey, the slow drip was good metaphor what this does to the body and the site. Ooh, yes, Michelle. Ooh, y'all teaching. It is ongoing trauma when it's constant. Yes, yeah, agreed. Agreed. These are some good insights. I can't wait for her to get back and for us to have the Q&A. Oh my gosh, and for her to continue. Yay, she's back. I just want to say, Dr. Olatunji, I just want to tell you that, honey, this chat is all lit up and that we were loving this. So we'll just let you get back to it, because I didn't even have to say a word because they was teaching me some stuff. All right, go ahead. I'm gonna turn off and put you back.
Let's see if we can finish this little video. With developmental issues as they transition into adolescence, out of adolescence, into adulthood, into middle age, preparing for retirement. There's just so many things that just human beings face. But this additive effect is something that we need to acquire confidence in. And that is understanding that for many people who belong to culturally marginalized groups, that this slow drip is something that is in the background, and we need to help them to deal with that, and to think about ways in which we can alter that reality to facilitate some form of change for them that's systemic, to facilitate empowerment, to be able to address social ills and so on. But the biggest thing about a slow drip is that we often don't notice it until it stops. And then there's this sigh of relief, and we realize how stressed out we really were. Ooh, we were able to get through that. So yes, we need to talk about that. I'm looking forward to it. So let me give you this, and we'll go through these last slides, and let's open it up because I'm ready to hear what you guys have to say. So this is an important slide, so I do want you to take notes. if you're a note-taking kind of person, to be able to do that. So this is our definition of continuous traumatic stress that we've gotten from the literature, from some scholars who are amazing. And we've been advancing their work. So the first thing is that continuous traumatic stress is different from, like you heard about PTSD or something like that. So this is new. This is the work, the research that's out there that helps us to understand the impact of race-based stress. So one, it acknowledges that the environment is pathological. That's important because like the example I gave a little girl, they were trying to say she was pathological, right? And it wasn't until I entered the picture that I, as a clinician, started confronting the system and informing them, no, the environment is pathological. Granted, the mom could have made better choices. Granted, she could have helped the daughter to make better choices. Absolutely, that's true. But at the same time, we have to say the environment is pathological. It was causing a problem. Second, it focuses on the present and the future rather than the past. So again, we've heard a lot about PTSD, which is about some event that happened in the past, right? So this is about racism, institutionalized or interpersonal, that people are experiencing right now. Could happen as they walk outside of our agency, walk outside of our homes, walk outside of our schools, and they're going to experience it. And also it's arming people against the future, because I say probably in my lifetime, even in the children I work with, in their lifetime, we're not going to see racism go away. We certainly are working toward minimizing it, but is it going to go away? Unlikely. Third, it observes that the trauma is unpredictable and sudden. So that means that we don't know when we're going to get hit with some ridiculous thing that's going to happen, because we're following the rules. We're operating as human beings, and most of us expect we're going to have a good day. But anything can happen that can derail us. Fourth, it acknowledges that the trauma occurs with impunity through institutional means. And again, if we use the example of that 10-year-old girl, yeah, the institution had authority. So it's just doing what it do, right? So that's the impunity, is that they've got all the rules. They hold all the keys to everything. And so the kids who were hurling, racist epithets and stuff at the girl, they were never punished at all. So the institution was supporting that. And the more the teacher didn't say anything, the bolder they got. So basically, the school as an institution was supporting their racist behavior. So this can happen, of course, over generations. So not only do our children experience this, probably their parents experienced it, probably their grandparents experienced it. So we've got these multiple generations of issues, right? So it becomes very cumulative. And the current research that has been happening over the last decade or so is giving us evidence of the impact of the continuous traumatic stress, of race-based stress, and what it looks like. Now, there's emerging research that helps us to look at young children who are toddlers and preschoolers and so on. And we're beginning to understand, actually, I have a book that's going to come out like maybe fall, winter, where I'm writing specifically about the 0 to 5-year-old group and about how we can see it, because people think that because children can't talk, for example, preverbal children, they're not experiencing a lot of things that we experience as adults. Nope, they are. They just don't have the ability to talk about it. So I thought, let me just express this, to talk about this and share this knowledge about the work that I've done with 0 to 5, with birth through 5, and being able to identify race-based stress and how it's impacting them, and to give examples of what some of the symptoms are and so on. So what it is that we know about race-based stress is that children are impacted in the womb. There's research that talks about what's happening to mothers. And so issues around preterm labor, about, premature births, about all kinds of issues. So children are born into a lot of these difficulties due to the dispositions of their parents. So we have, a list of signs of distress. So in thinking about the physical and psychological problems that children can have, we see it a lot once they hit school because they're expected to perform, right? And so we begin to see some of the impact of that. And I've done some of that research myself in comparing some of these kids to other kids who have not had the same kind of exposure to race-based stress, to see their trajectory as they go through elementary school and into middle school and so on. And we see their disengagement from school that ultimately results in a lot of behavior referrals. And of course, it impacts their graduation rates. So just a quick review, thinking about adverse childhood experiences, of really thinking about how do we reconceptualize what trauma is to add it to this issue of adverse childhood experiences, of thinking about how do we learn how to assess so that we can pick out what children are experiencing and how do we intervene in working with them. Right. So I talk a lot about, because I deal with kids in schools a lot. How do we do that? So when we think about responses of interventions, we need to use culturally situated interventions. So parents need to think about what is it that they do with their kids? How do you surround them with culturally situated tools? Think about what books they have. What's the decor? How do you decorate their rooms? If you're a teacher, how do you decorate your classroom? If you're a childcare provider, how are you decorating the space where children are? How are you affirming who these children are and what it is that they bring to the table? We need to increase our awareness, augment our knowledge, engage in culture-centered activities, and definitely always advocate for culturally diverse children. So I think that is it. Of course, I have this institute coming up, but I'm going to stop the share right now because I want to answer some of your questions. Of course, because I got lost, I missed some of the earlier questions. I only have like the last 4 postings. So Sarita, I'm going to rely upon you to verbally say those because I don't have those.
Okay, sounds good. So guys, I hope that you guys have been, jotting down your questions. I did see one come up earlier, and I think you addressed that when she asked for an example of, let me go back to it. She asked for an example of, institutional racism, which you gave in very in-depth example. And then, so nobody has put anything in yet, but I will share with you some of the feedback from the video, and then if anybody wants to, come on and ask questions of Dr. Cirecie, you can. Also, Nancy said, can they get the link for the video? That video was powerful. And as we were waiting for you to reconnect, we were all like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Pam said the drip illustrated the impact of constant pressure and how it may drain us. And I'm sharing this because sometimes, guys, when you get kicked out of the webinars or you get kicked out of Zoom, you're not able to see all of the chat before you got there. So I'm sharing it with her. They talked about the slow drip is sneaky and terrible. There's literal torture methods of dripping water on someone. So that's really applicable. That is deep. It's ongoing trauma when it's constant. Like the slow drip is a good metaphor of what this does to both the body and the psyche. And it's like, I'm going to say Mike's because he says Lucretia said, yes, her language and the dripping sound created a great scenario regarding sensory. And Mike said, I think the dripping is a great metaphor for slowly losing your energy and capacity to deal with, in this case, racism, and like a hole in a bucket.
Okay.
And then we had, yes, and we can tolerate single drip. So when it's constant, it's something else. Regina said the video spoke volumes to the current culture of today. It is exhausting to describe current conditions. And guys, if anybody would like to come on camera and ask a question, you can totally do that, and we will unmic you, and you can, join the conversation. All right, we got Jamila. Hey, Jamila. Welcome. Thank you. You're unmuted.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, doctor, and thank you, Sarita, for, all of this. What's standing out to me is this transgenerational trauma and how that correlates to the early childhood experience. Because I'm thinking about like resiliency and our like ability to bounce back.
Yeah.
And that's all within the culture. But when it comes to parenting, you got to be on that bounce back. But I was just wondering if you could shed some light to speak a little more about how to parent. Like what can we be on the lookout, or just any tips or tools with experiencing, like being a non-white experience as an adult, and hearing the stories from my parents and grandparents, but then raising young children.
Yes.
It's a whole lot.
Yeah, no, you're right, Jamila. And that's a great question. So one of the things I did, I was part of a program last summer, and I was mentoring one of our graduate students who was working with these girls. And I said, one of the things that we need to do is to help parents to understand how to work with race-based stress. And one of the things is the narratives, which is what you brought up, of telling these stories. But I said, we don't think, intentionally about how to tell these stories developmentally. So I worked out a little activity, and I said, just in Zoom, brought the mothers and the daughters on. And I said, okay, that created a worksheet for them. And I said, the first thing is for the mom to tell a story about when she encountered racism and, what happened, just the what happened to it. So mom did that. And just between them, the intimacy of telling the story. And the daughter was like, wow. So first thing is that girls assume, daughters, children assume parents have it all together. So they think it's happening just to them and that there's something wrong with them, right? So they're suffering alone. Parents think, well, I shouldn't talk about it, right? Or they talk about it in away kinds of terms of somebody else, some time way back, or somebody they don't know or don't know well. But this connection between parent and child, intimate, I experienced that. Absolutely. To tell the story developmentally appropriate. This is what happened. This is what I did. Right. Then the conversation moves to, are there other people who experience this in our circle? Right. So you can talk about grandma, you can talk about auntie, talk about other people. So it opens the dialogue up. There's so much shame around being a victim of racism. And there's also been the intimidation from the dominant group that talking about it, we get penalized for mentioning it, right? So we have to relearn that there is no shame in being a victim of the pathology out there, of suffering in the pathology. So we have to talk about it. Then you move the conversation to, well, what did you do about it? How did you advocate? How did you handle it? What are the best ways to deal with it? Do that. Then you turn it around. Then the parent asks the child, can you tell me a story of when you've experienced racism? And then they're always shocked because the child comes right out with a story right away. And it doesn't matter what kind of school they go to, doesn't matter what their income level is. It's like the children readily tell a story of something that's happened to them. Now, what shocked me when I asked them to do this activity is more often than not, the girls said what they did about it is nothing, and they came home and cried about it. Now, that shocked me because it told me already they're internalizing it. So they don't know what tools are at their disposal to be able to deal with race-based stress. So it's important for us to be able to talk about it. So the narratives, Jamila, absolutely. We need to have constant narratives for children of being resilient, of overcoming, of telling these stories about how you can survive and thrive. So what are the things that we need to do? Second, we need to be able to surround them with it. So most people just get children what it is that they ask for, the most popular thing that's out there, right? And so they do that. And it's like, no, it's like if you leave it to the default, it's going to emphasize the dominant group. So the books that you get your children are great stories. They may even look like they're multicultural, but then when you look at it, it's like, oh, but that's not the hero of the story. So always when you think about it, if you have a little girl, get books that have little girls as the hero of the story. If you have a little boy, get books about little boys who are heroes. And then you can add on. If they're boys, do more girls. If they're girls, do more boys. If you have a lot where they are learning about other ethnic groups as well, because they're getting information about other groups from the dominant group, from those books. So you got to even go get those books in those, you got to find where to go, what's the special little bookstore to get that. Find those where those kids are heroes in the story and get those books added to their collection. Same thing with the videos you get, same thing right down to what pictures do you have up in the room, what patterns on the fabric that are used for the curtains and for their comforters and things like that, everything, because think about it now, piénselo. Think about it. If you don't do it, the default is the dominant group. So you're actually promoting their strengths, their stuff. And that's not a bad thing if our children were all right, okay, already. Then they could be able to interact and be fine. But when there is a lack of information, when there's a lack of emphasis that we can be the smartest, we can be the most courageous, we can be the prettiest. If you get a heavy dose that they have that, then they can interact. And then you can start thinking about getting other books that have little white kids in them and so on. Then they already have the message that, yeah, I can be whatever I want. I can be the hero. I can be, and that whole thing. But if you don't do the work, the default is a heavy, heavy watershed of information that promotes, dominant group values. So
Dr. Cirecie,
it's important that we do that.
I'm sorry. Molly said, so I'm going to take Molly's question. You answer Lucretia's, and then Mike also had a question. Molly said, at what age would you have the parent tell a story like this to their child?
In the womb. You should be telling stories. I mean, you've seen that. You've heard that already. Mm-hmm. That you can play music. You can talk to your children in the womb. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Start then. When they're babies, there. Right? You'd be surprised. By the time they start talking, they have memorized some of the things that you've been saying and so on. So just like they listen to you when you talk about TV and you talk about the internet, they'll also listen to you as you talk about how amazing your grandparents or great-grandparents were in overcoming stuff. And it never ends. My mom is 94. She'll be 95 this year. And my grandfather, her father, was a sharecropper. And it wasn't until recently a friend of mine asked me, how did they get out of it? And it occurred to me, I had never asked that question. I recorded it. I did. I asked my mom, how'd you do it? And it's an amazing, heroic story of how they got out. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I thought my people didn't do nothing. My particular family, other people have, oh, my father was a lawyer and they did, civil rights lawyer. They were this, they were that. My parents, they marched with, my parents were just your average parents. They were like, don't go out there. It's going to be trouble, da, da, da. They didn't do a lot of stuff. They were just your average folks. So I thought we didn't have any stories of heroism, but found out just getting out from under being a sharecropper, it is an incredibly heroic story. I will pass that on, right? And share that with everybody. So we all have stories, all of our families have stories of being heroes. And we need to be telling those stories in the womb.
So I know that we are just about at 1:00. Mike, we are going to hear from you. Thank you guys. I know that some of you guys will have to jump off. And so thank you so much. Mike, please stay because we do want to hear if you guys want to hear, the answers to this question. And then we also want to share before you guys go after Mike, we want to share the link to her upcoming in-person workshop. This is a collaboration between Dr. Cirecie and Be Strong Families. We will be in New Orleans for, May 25th, experiencing this, for 4 hours. So please come. You can use the QR code and you can register there to join us in person. Yes, it's a great reason for a trip. Okay, Mike.
Gosh, I wish I was in New Orleans. First of all, I'm so sorry that my hand is brown and I am not. I have no idea how to fix that. I don't know why that is. But so I work for an organization that does a lot of youth mentoring in schools, mostly K-8. We have one high school. And I'm kind of wondering what my role and my coworkers' roles can be as white people from the dominant culture in recognizing and supporting these students as they're going through these continuous race-based traumas. I hope this isn't a false equivalency, but as an autistic person existing in the dominant culture of neurotypicality, I can see a lot of parallels. And so while I have empathy in that regard, I obviously don't want to overstep, et cetera. So how would you recommend that I and my colleagues address this?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you very much. And I can hear, it sounds like you're an ally. That's fantastic. And one should use one's own experiences, absolutely, to be able to empathize with other people. Absolutely. So I do hear that and appreciate it. The first thing that we say always is to do an environmental scan. That's the first thing. So you need to sit down and take a look at everything and ask, are there enough stories of resilience, of coping, of being amazing? Do we have enough of those in the area so that if I were a little kid from whatever group, that I would look around and go, okay, this feels good. I feel safe. Yeah, it's like there's enough of me up in here for me to feel comfortable. Or do I come in and think I'm in a foreign land and my job is just to stay above water, but this is not somewhere where I feel at home or safe or anything. And kids know where that is. And I'll give you an example of a white social studies teacher from my middle school experience. They weren't middle schools then, they were junior high schools. But I remember this teacher, white male. And all my life, whenever Black people got brought up, it was traumatic. It's traumatic. Teachers make so many blunders, even when they're well-intentioned. They make so many blunders and make kids feel under a microscope when they're talking about it. I'm not even going to go into some of the things that have happened over the years. But I remember getting to junior high school in this one class now where I remember feeling safe and I remember feeling validated. And he was talking about our enslavement period, but he used to talk about the resistance that people were dealing with. And he'd have us laughing to this day. This is decades later. I still remember his voice. And he's saying, oh, he's like, yeah, he's like, and so people were resisting all the time. So the cook would grind up some glass and put it into the gumbo, put it into the thing. And there would be the laughter in the cabins would be a little bit louder that night, and talking about how they would do things to compromise, to slow down the work, to do things like that. And he was saying people were always doing things. And he'd end the story with, and the laughter was a little bit louder in the cabins that night. As a little kid, I felt validated. It wasn't a story of these poor folks, they didn't do anything, it just happened to them and blah, 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 blah. He talked about empowerment. He talked about resistance. He gave a counter narrative that I had never heard before. And I was 13, 14 years old at the time. I never heard anything like that. And so I felt safe in that classroom, and I felt good about myself. And I felt that I had something to be proud of sitting there with those dominant kids in the classroom. It made me feel different. So we need to think about, how do we tell stories? Are we sharing counter narratives? And we need to do an environmental scan to see how welcoming, how safe is the environment that we're in. So that's at the micro level of what's going on in each classroom, but it's the school culture itself of how welcoming is it? Are the voices, is there space for these voices from these kids? So I say that's a place to start to be able to do that. I do want to say, and I know New Orleans is a long way for some people, but it would be a great opportunity to stay on your own, dime after, and stay in New Orleans and enjoy yourself, because this institute will be focusing on skills. So it's a skill-based interactive thing. So I talked about the assessment tools. I talked about the environmental scan. We'll have all these worksheets that I'll be giving out to people. So whether you're a teacher or you're a leader, you're an agency person, you're childcare developer, you're a parent, whatever way you're interacting with kids of color, we're going to help you to develop the skills to counter race-based stress.
You made me, and I'll be there. So yay, both Sarita and Dr. Cirecie will be in the building. So we would love to have you guys come. And I just want to say, thank you so much for today's conversation. You really have my wheels turning. One of the things that I've learned as a parent and having other parent friends is oftentimes I watch some of my friends opt out of the African-American schools because they feel like they'll get a better education when they move their children to a dominant school. Yeah. And then I've watched those babies struggle with, it's a different struggle. There's like the educational part if you're in the African-American school sometimes, but then when they go to, trying to do better, quote unquote, do better by moving their children there. And then they find their, children in the same situation that you talked about, like being in an all white community and they're the only little brown person there. So it made me think about that, and also made me think of wanting to reach out to those parents to say, are you having these conversations with your kids? Are you talking to them about racism? Because they are encountering it. There's no way that they're saturated in that environment and they're the only ones, and and they're not being affected or impacted. So thank you for today. This was huge. Thank you everybody who stayed with us and went the distance with us. You know what we like to do. Go ahead and amplify something positive in the chat. And Lori, were you able to drop the link to the Eventbrite?
Yes,
so people can register. Thank you, because we know you guys want to be with us in New Orleans. So send it to your friends. If you can't come, I like to say sometimes take what you can use, and if you can't use it, give it to somebody else. So if you can't make it to New Orleans, you got people in the area, share the info. Don't forget to join us for the Taste of Cafe on April 12th and then April 28th, led by the parent team. We love cafes. You will too. Use the QR code and register today. And yay! And Dr. Cirecie said she's gonna share the slow drip with us. Yay! Okay, next slide. Yay, I love it. Join us. You can catch this webinar and all the other ones on our YouTube channel. Okay. Don't trip. Go there. You can catch the webinar there, and then you can share, because man, was this good? Oh my gosh. People are saying thank you in the chat that this was awesome. Don't forget to stop by the Be Strong Family Shop and get all your Parent Cafe supplies. Use the QR code to visit there. And then thank you for joining us. Anybody else put Amplify? Put some stuff in there. Amplify. Before you leave out the room, go ahead and amplify something positive. What will you amplify today? Hashtag amplify what? Hashtag amplify knowledge. I'm going to say amplify voice of resistance. Yes, Mike, thank you. I'm going to amplify knowledge. We got amplify wisdom, amplify wow. Oh, this was so good. You know what? I just want to say, guys, if you guys think she should come back in the fall and promote her book here, go ahead and, and drop it in the chat, okay? Tell her we want you back, Dr. Cirecie. Every time she comes, I feel all powered up afterwards, like, I'm about to go take on the world. Hashtag story amplify storytelling, hashtag amplify awareness, amplify unity. I love it. This makes you feel good. It's a great way to end the webinar with these amplifies. Thank you guys for joining us today, and thank you for staying over for. We really appreciate it. We appreciate Dr. Cirecie for coming and sharing this wonderful information with us. Thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you. And we cannot wait to see you guys next week. And we can't wait to see you in New Orleans. Also, if you haven't signed up for Chad Morris's webinar for his Institute Day is next Monday from April 10th. It is online. If you haven't done that, you want to get in on that one too, okay? All right, guys. We'll see you next week, and we'll see you in New Orleans, May 25th.